Let's talk about what kind of athletes benefit from creatine. And in order to answer this question, you should be able to look at any sport, even if you've never played that sport before. And if you look at the metabolic demands of the sport, you should be able to determine if creatine supplementation would benefit that kind of athlete. So this is a nice summary from Eric Rawson. This is his latest, it was in 2018, but his latest review on creatine for the Gatorade Sports Science Institute. So if this is interesting, you want to learn more, go ahead and visit that citation that you see down there. He's a really good go-to for all things creatine related. But here he has a table summarizing what we know about the greater body of literature. The way this is set up, you see the type of event someone's doing, how long that event lasts, what the benefit could possibly be, and then certain things that we've noticed about the research and then specific research that's related to that activity. So in lab tests, anything lasting less than 30 seconds does demonstrate some support for being effective in terms of improving performance. Okay. So less than 30-second lab activities, less than 30-second field-based tests. So that would be like sport in action in the actual environment rather than in a controlled lab setting. We do see a benefit to performance here. Now we start getting into different sorts of events. If you look at swimming, for example, swimming's kind of tricky because there's a lot of different events within swimming. There can be very short if you're talking about a 50-meter. It can be very long, up to like a 1,500 if you're talking meters, 1,650 if you're talking yards. So there's a large variety in the types of events people do. So to say swimmers benefit or don't benefit really isn't accurate. Very much like track and field, you're going to have to look at the actual event that that person does. But what we see is that there is improvement in overall performance when you're talking repeated sprint intervals, not as effective if you're talking about single sprints. So this is, again, creatine works as a workout tool. So if somebody's taking in creatine and working out, doing their practices a couple times a day, and the nature of the workout is repeated sprints, they're going to see some adaptations, and that will help them become better swimmers when competition time comes. It's not effective for just a single sprint. So taking in creatine and then going for one time trial is not going to see any benefit at all. When it comes to medium duration tasks, anywhere from 30 seconds to 5 minutes, some studies are showing some benefit, but likely that's due to a glycogen component, not so much the creatine component. And that makes sense. We're not relying on the PCR system much here. There could be a little bit of a buffering situation, which could help potentially with the improvements in performance, but those are the types of sports that are really going to benefit most from this. If there's a sprint within or after an endurance exercise, and this is interesting, we don't tend to think of this aspect to sport much, but if you look at Tour de France riders, for example, they're not all just hopping on their bike and pedaling for hours on end. There's actually events within the big event itself. And there are some sprints within the endurance component, which is interesting, right? So there is some support that there could be some benefit to overall power production here, but there's not a lot of studies to determine if that is effective. So right now it's kind of up in the air, but fortunately for us, that doesn't really, we don't really factor this into most sports that we're dealing with. Now, endurance activity, there is no improvement in endurance performance here, and that should make sense. Anything over 5 minutes, you're not relying on PCR very much. And I would say that you might actually see a decrease in your sport performance due to the weight gain. Endurance exercise and endurance performance is really weight dependent. So if you're increasing weight for essentially no good reason, then you're not going to see any improvements in performance, possibly even a decrease in performance. Lastly, strength and conditioning workouts. So this is really where the rubber meets the road. And this is where creatine supplementation is really going to be a positive aspect if the athlete chooses to do so. So this is intermittent in nature, very clearly. I think we're all familiar with how weightlifting and conditioning workouts go. there is overwhelming evidence that it is going to be beneficial here. And this is the reason why creatine supplementation is going to be a good idea for some people. And that is, remember, it's a training tool. So using this in the a very high conditioning part of the season will help that athlete adapt, because every workout is a higher quality. They're able to lift more. They're able to run faster if they're doing sprints. So in those cases, if you do that over and over and over again, your body adapts in a positive way, more so than if you were to not supplement with creatine. And that's not to say that we need to recommend it. I would not say that's an ethical thing to do. But if somebody were interested in it and they were doing strength conditioning workouts, there's a lot of evidence to support that decision.